The first rays of the morning sun stretched across the flight deck of the USS Nimitz, casting amber and gold hues on the steel surfaces. The air was still cool, the scent of salt water mixing with the faint tang of jet fuel, a familiar and grounding aroma that Elise Reeves breathed in deeply. Lieutenant Commander Reeves stood at the edge of the massive carrier, her hands gripping the cold, worn railing as she gazed out over the expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The water stretched endlessly in all directions, the same unbroken blue that had defined her career for the past 8 years. This view had become her home, her anchor, a place that held both challenge and purpose. As a specialist in underwater acoustics, she spent her days detecting threats that others couldn't hear. Her nights spent ensuring the safety of her crew and the ship's operations. The routine of the morning was comforting, like a well-practiced dance that gave her a sense of control in an often unpredictable world. The faint rumble of jet engines began to build, vibrating through the steel beneath her boots as the FA-18 Super Hornets powered up on the catapult. She could feel the tension in the air, the energy building as the fighter jets prepared to launch into the sky. Elise watched as the jets roared off the flight deck one by one, their engines screaming as they were launched into the open sky, their metal frames cutting through the morning mist like knives. It was a sight she had seen countless times before, but it never lost its impact. The Super Hornets were sleek, powerful, symbols of strength, and watching them ascend always reminded her of the greater purpose she served. In the Navy, it was moments like these, when she stood at the edge of the Nimitz with her eyes on the horizon, that she felt most at peace with the life she had chosen. The flight deck, bustling with the organized chaos of military precision, was a world of its own. Crew members moved quickly, their every step purposeful, their actions choreographed. Elise felt the vibrations of the jets in her chest, each one a reminder of the magnitude of her work. The wind tugged at her dark hair, and for a brief moment, she closed her eyes, letting the sensation wash over her. This was her element, a place where purpose and duty converged. The Navy wasn't just a career for Elise, it was part of who she was, deeply ingrained into her sense of identity. This ship, these men and women, the endless ocean stretching ahead, they were home. The familiarity of the day-to-day routine offered a quiet kind of pride, a pride that was as solid and constant as the ship she stood upon. Despite the peace she found in the routine, there was always an undercurrent of anticipation, of knowing that at any moment the call could come, a call that would change everything. But for now, standing there on the deck, with the first rays of sunlight warming her face, Elise was content. The world felt right in this moment, and she was ready to face whatever came next. This was home. This was the calm before the storm. Elise had just taken her first sip of coffee when the sudden buzz of the intercom cut through the stillness of the morning. It wasn't a call she was used to receiving. The message was clear, but the tone was unfamiliar. Lieutenant Commander Reeves, report to the captain's quarters immediately. No explanation, no specifics, just an order. She set her mug down, her fingers lingering on the edge, as a cold sense of unease settled in her stomach. This wasn't the usual summons. The shift in the air around her was palpable, as if something unseen had shifted within the ship's steady rhythm. As she made her way through the labyrinthine hallways of the USS Nimitz, something felt off. The usual greetings from sailors were absent. As she passed, they averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply focused on whatever task they had at hand. A quiet unease rippled through the corridors. The crew had always been friendly, always acknowledging her with nods or brief salutes. But today, their faces were blank, their movements stiff, as if they were all in on something she didn't know. When she reached the captain's office, the door was already open. 2 men stood on either side, their uniforms sharply pressed, their haircuts so meticulous they could have been carved from stone. They weren't dressed in naval whites, but rather in civilian clothing, with a cold, formal air about them that made her spine stiffen. Captain Harmon stood behind his desk, his back slightly turned. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable. Elise felt the tension in the room before a single word was spoken. "At ease, Commander," Captain Harmon finally spoke. But his voice was devoid of the warmth that had always characterized his presence. He didn't meet her eyes as he continued, his gaze fixed on the papers in front of him. Effective immediately, "You are relieved of your duty aboard this vessel." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mind raced, trying to process what she had just heard. She blinked, certain she had misheard him. "Sir, may I ask on what grounds?" she managed to say, though the question felt hollow even as it left her lips. The taller of the 2 intelligence officers slid a thick folder across the desk, his face a mask of indifference. The folder was official, marked with the kind of clearance she had never seen before. He didn't answer her, only nodded at the folder in front of her. Elise's fingers curled around the edge of the folder, but she didn't open it yet. Instead, she turned back to Captain Harmon, trying to find any hint of explanation. But all she got was a slight wince that was quickly masked. "Your team," she began, but the words seemed to fall away before she could finish. The second intelligence officer interjected before she could say more, his voice flat and cold. "This matter is non-negotiable and non-discussable." The finality in his tone sent a chill through her, and her stomach tightened. Elise was being dismissed. There were no apologies, no ceremony, just an abrupt end to everything she had worked for. No reason was given. No acknowledgement of her years of service, of the sacrifices she had made. It was as if she had never mattered. "Pack your things and report to the lower deck for departure. You have 20 minutes. The words were mechanical, devoid of any empathy, as though this had been decided long before her arrival. The two intelligence officers moved to escort her, flanking her on either side. She could feel their eyes on her, but neither of them spoke as they guided her out. As she made her way back through the ship, the silence around her was deafening. The crew, who had once treated her like a colleague, now avoided her gaze. Some even stepped aside as she passed, not willing to acknowledge her presence. Her heart pounded in her chest as the growing suspicion gnawed at her. What was happening? Why was she being sent away like this? When she reached her quarters, it was clear that nothing was normal. Her belongings were already packed, everything neatly folded into a duffel bag. The familiar photos of her family, the mementos of years aboard the Nimitz, were gone. Her uniforms hung empty in the closet, and the room felt eerily silent. The folder with her orders was still under her arm, unopened. She couldn't bring herself to look at it just yet, not when everything felt so surreal. The Marines arrived moments later, without any formal send-off, and Elise felt the weight of her entire career slipping through her fingers. No one was there to say goodbye, not even her closest friends. She turned toward the door, her chest tight with confusion and a sense of betrayal she couldn't shake. The only thing she could do now was follow the orders, but in that moment, she didn't know where those orders would lead her, or what awaited her beyond the ship. The small motorboat rocked gently beneath Elise as it made its way farther. From the USS Nimitz, the carrier growing smaller with each passing minute, the boat's engine sputtered intermittently, the hum of the motor a constant companion in the quiet expanse of the ocean. No words were exchanged between the driver and Elise, just the distant sound of water lapping against the hull. There were no goodbyes, no salutes. The sailors who had once worked beside her, who had greeted her with smiles and respect, were gone. It was as if she had never existed. Her departure nothing more than a brief, mechanical transaction. The waves stretched endlessly in all directions. The vastness of the Pacific a reminder of just how small and isolated she now felt. Elise stared at the receding silhouette of the USS Nimitz, her home for the last 8 years, knowing she would never set foot on it again. The boat bobbed gently, the horizon ahead as empty and uninviting as the future that lay before her. She had no idea where she was being taken or why. The folder, still tucked under her arm, offered no answers, just coordinates and an order to wait. Her stomach twisted with confusion, the uncertainty pressing down on her chest like a weight she couldn't shake. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, and still, nothing had changed. The world around her was a blur of water and sky, endless and impersonal. Then, just as the quiet had begun to feel suffocating, something shifted. Elise's gaze drifted across the water, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. She had been out at sea long enough to know how the waves shifted and broke. But this felt different. The water just ahead of her began to churn, not in the normal rhythm of ocean swells, but in a way that felt deliberate. Elise leaned forward, squinting into the distance. For a moment, it was as though the ocean itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the surface of the water broke, and a massive black shape rose from the depths. The boat slowed as Elise's heart began to race. What she saw before her was no ordinary vessel. It was sleek, almost otherworldly in its design. Its hull was smooth and angular, like a creature emerging from the deep, and there were no markings, no indication of its origin. Elise's mind raced, trying to place it, but nothing came to mind. She had never seen a submarine like this. The eerie silence around her only added to the strangeness of the situation. The vessel didn't make a sound, its movements fluid and precise, like something designed to operate in the shadows, far from the eyes of the world. The submarine continued to rise slowly, its sleek conning tower breaking the surface last, water streaming off its smooth, black surface. Elise held her breath as the hatch at the top opened, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the sun. He raised binoculars, scanning her boat, and for a moment, Elise felt as though he were looking right through her. Then, without warning, the figure waved at her, a single, deliberate motion that seemed to signal something, a message she wasn't sure she understood. The tension in Elise's chest tightened, her instincts screaming at her to turn around and head back. But something stopped her. Something in the way the figure had moved. The deliberate calmness that told her this was no accident. She had been led here. She glanced at the small boat's GPS, but there was no sign of land. No sign of any other ships, just the vastness of the ocean stretching on. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion as she slowly steered the motorboat closer to the submarine. With every passing second, the feeling of isolation deepened. She was a long way from the ship that had been her home, and now she was heading toward a vessel she didn't recognize, one that was as much a mystery to her as the orders that had led her here. As the boat drew nearer, she could see more details: the crew members moving on the deck, their faces impassive, their uniforms devoid of any identifying insignia. There were no flags, no markings, nothing to suggest this vessel was a part of any known fleet. The figure who had waved now spoke, his voice carrying across the water. "Commander Reeves?" he called, his tone oddly familiar, as though he had been expecting her. "Welcome aboard the USS Phantom." Ah. Elise froze, her heart skipping a beat. USS Phantom. She had never heard of such a vessel. She had been in the Navy long enough to know every ship in the fleet, every classification, every designation. But this was something completely unknown, something secret. She hesitated, her mind racing. The folder had given her no clue about this ship, only vague orders. And now, a mysterious submarine, unmarked and unknown, was claiming her. She wanted to protest, to demand answers, but the feeling of being drawn into something much larger than herself was undeniable. Her boat slowed as she moved closer to the submarine, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she couldn't. There was no turning back now. The crew on the deck didn't move, but they were watching her, their faces unreadable. They waited for her to make the final decision, as though it had already been made for her. Elise knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary mission. This was a world far beyond anything she had ever known, and whatever answers she was seeking, they lay somewhere within this mysterious vessel. But what she didn't know was just how much this moment would change her life. Elise stepped onto the USS Phantom, her boots clicking on the steel deck, a sound that echoed in the silence. As she crossed the gangway, she couldn't shake the sense that she had just entered another world. The submarine's exterior was sleek and intimidating. Unlike anything she had seen before, there were no insignias, no markings to indicate which fleet this ship belonged to, or even that it was part of the U.S. Navy. It felt as though she had stepped off the map entirely. Elise's mind raced as she was escorted deeper into the vessel, the low hum of the engines vibrating beneath her feet, steady and unyielding. Inside, the USS Phantom was like a fortress, practical, yet unsettling in its clinical precision. The crew moved with an efficiency she had never seen aboard a surface ship. They seemed unfazed by her presence, almost too accustomed to the secrecy that cloaked their mission. There was no warmth here, no camaraderie that she was used to on the Nimitz. It felt like everything was hidden behind walls of silence, and she was just beginning to understand why. Captain Marcus Harlow met her in a dimly lit compartment near the control center, his face weathered but sharp, his eyes focused and calculating. He had been waiting for her, and there was an air of quiet authority around him that made Elise stand a little straighter. His uniform was simple but functional. No unnecessary embellishments. Harlow didn't waste time with pleasantries, his voice calm but firm as he began to speak. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "Welcome aboard the USS Phantom. You've been brought here for a reason, and it's time you knew what that reason is." Elise's heart raced. She had known there was more to her transfer than the abrupt, unexplained dismissal, but hearing it now confirmed all her suspicions. Harlow gestured toward the expansive operations screen behind him, which flickered to life, revealing detailed sonar images of the ocean floor. "This is a highly classified vessel. Commander, our primary mission is to track and neutralize underwater threats, specifically unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs. These are advanced, silent vehicles designed to perform undetectable surveillance. We've been tracking them for months, and we need your skills to do what no one else has been able to." Elise stared at the screen, the intricate details of the UUV's movements appearing on the sonar display. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These vehicles were stealthy, almost impossible to detect by conventional sonar systems. The Navy had been working to identify them, but each time they seemed to vanish into the depths. That was where Elise's expertise came in her ability to analyze subtle, acoustic anomalies that others missed. The mission was much more than she had anticipated. It wasn't just about tracking submarines or detecting undersea disturbances. This was a matter of national security. Harlow's voice grew more intense as he continued. The UUVs we're tracking are not just tools of espionage. They are a direct threat to our underwater defense systems. They've been detected near key communication lines, surveillance networks, and military infrastructure. If they are left unchecked, they could cripple our ability to monitor and respond to emerging threats. That's why you're here, Commander. Your algorithms are our only hope of staying ahead. Elise took a step forward, her mind struggling to catch up with the information being thrown at her. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. For the first time, she understood the magnitude of what was at stake. These UUVs were silent, deadly, and capable of undermining critical national security infrastructure without anyone even realizing it. But it was her work, her algorithms that could help track them. The thought both humbled and terrified her. Your transfer from the USS Nimitz wasn't just a routine reassignment. Commander, Harlow said, his tone shifting slightly. It was orchestrated because we needed you here. Your unique skills in underwater acoustics are exactly what we need to make a breakthrough in this operation. The Phantom's crew has been working tirelessly to identify the origins of these UUVs, but we can't do it without you. Elise swallowed hard, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had spent years working tirelessly to develop acoustic detection systems, but to hear now that her work had led to this, had led to a mission this important, was overwhelming. Her role was not just about analyzing data, it was about contributing to something far greater than herself. The responsibility felt like a stone in her gut, and yet a small part of her was exhilarated by the challenge. Harlow studied her face, perhaps sensing the internal battle she was facing. You'll be working with our best team, but this mission will require everything you have. The UUVs are being deployed with unprecedented sophistication. The technology they're using is far beyond anything we've seen before, and conventional sonar can't detect them. But you, Commander, you can make the difference. Elise nodded, though the enormity of the task was far from lost on her. She was no stranger to high-stakes work, but this was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The task before her was daunting, the risks were high, and the secrecy surrounding it all only added to the pressure. But as she looked at the screen, the faint outlines of the UUVs moving silently through the water, she knew there was no turning back. She had made a commitment to the Navy years ago, and this was her duty, no matter how unknown or dangerous it might be. Welcome aboard, Commander, Harlow said, his voice steady, the finality of his words leaving little room for doubt. Elise felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders, but she straightened, standing tall. She had a job to do, and now, more than ever, she knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. Elise had barely settled into her station aboard the USS Phantom before the weight of the mission became all too clear. The control room was stark and efficient, designed for one purpose: to track the UUVs that had been silently infiltrating the Pacific's underwater defenses. Elise stood at her workstation, surrounded by advanced acoustic systems, each monitor flashing with an overwhelming stream of data. The UUVs, small but sophisticated, moved like ghosts through the water, their silent propulsion systems undetectable by conventional sonar. She ran her fingers over the keys, her mind already sharpening the algorithms that would give the crew the edge. The task before her was monumental. The UUVs were elusive, their acoustic signatures almost imperceptible. Elise's algorithms had been her bread and butter on the USS Nimitz, but here they would need to evolve. Her fingers danced over the controls, refining and adjusting, comparing the complex data against known acoustic patterns. Each line of code she wrote was a step closer to uncovering the truth about these silent threats. The system hummed with energy as she calibrated the sensors, her mind fully absorbed in the task. Hours passed, and the monotony of the endless data streams began to settle in. The crew of the USS Phantom worked tirelessly alongside her, but Elise remained the focal point of the operation. Her ability to detect the faintest anomalies in the data was their only hope. As she looked at the screen, her eyes narrowed on a series of low-frequency signals that didn't quite match anything in the database. At first, she thought it was a glitch, but something about the pattern felt deliberate. It was as though the UUVs were communicating with each other, coordinating their movements. She adjusted the filters and focused her attention on the anomaly. The breakthrough came late one night. Long after most of the crew had retreated to their quarters, Elise had been staring at the screen for hours, fatigue setting in. When the data clicked, The faint signals she had been tracking were not just noise. They were a communication pulse, a pattern of clicks and pauses that only the most advanced underwater vehicles would use. Elise leaned forward, her heart racing as she refined the signal, isolating the exact frequencies that the drones were using to coordinate their movements. It was the confirmation she had been waiting for. These drones were not just drifting in the ocean. They were part of a larger, coordinated operation. She immediately shared her findings with Captain Harlow, whose eyes widened as he saw the data. The implications were clear. These UUVs were not simply gathering intelligence. They were actively mapping key underwater locations, military bases, communication cables, and other vital infrastructure. Elise's algorithms had given them the edge they needed to identify the threat. These drones were working together, using acoustic signals to communicate across vast distances, something no one had suspected until now. As the mission grew more intense, Elise found herself spending longer hours in the control room. The rhythmic beeping of the sonar system and the occasional click of the keyboard were the only sounds that filled the silence. The data continued to pour in, each wave bringing more questions than answers. Elise was becoming obsessed with the task, unable to tear herself away from the screens. There was a growing sense of urgency, a realization that each moment they spent tracking these UUVs brought them one step closer to uncovering their origin. But the deeper they delved, the more she understood that this mission was much larger than she had ever imagined. The crew, once a team of specialists from different corners of the fleet, began to see Elise as the key to the operation. Her work was critical, and she knew it. Every breakthrough she made, every improvement to the algorithms, brought them closer to understanding the enemy's plan. The pressure mounted, but Elise felt a surge of pride in her work. It was what she had trained for, what she had dedicated her life to, tracking the unseen, uncovering the hidden threats lurking beneath the surface. Weeks passed, and the data continued to flood in. Elise and the crew of the USS Phantom had tracked dozens of UUVs, their movements becoming increasingly coordinated. Each discovery led to another, until they realized the full scope of the operation. These UUVs weren't just surveying random sites, they were targeting specific locations, perhaps preparing for an underwater assault or gathering intelligence for a future strike. The team worked in unison, analyzing each piece of data, piecing together the puzzle that had seemed impossible just weeks before. One evening, Elise stared at the latest sonar readouts and felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The UUVs were moving with a precision that suggested they knew exactly what they were looking for. The pattern they had been following led directly to a critical undersea communication line running between Guam and the United States mainland. The implications were clear. They were not just monitoring the defense network, they were preparing to disrupt it. Elise's mind raced as she formulated a plan to counter the UUV's movements, adjusting her algorithms once again to detect even the smallest change in their behavior. She knew that time was running out, and the stakes had never been higher. The pressure of the mission weighed heavily on her, but Elise had never felt more certain about her place in the Navy. She wasn't just an analyst anymore. She was a vital part of a team working to protect national security. And the work they were doing aboard the USS Phantom could change the course of history. As the days turned into weeks, Elise's expertise became indispensable. The data continued to pile up, but it was no longer just numbers on a screen. It was a story unfolding beneath the waves. The UUVs were not just tools of espionage. They were a part of something much larger, a threat to everything Elise had sworn to protect. The realization that her work was the key to stopping this threat made her more determined than ever. She wouldn't rest until the mission was complete, no matter what it took. Each moment in the control room felt like a race against time. Elise could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on her, but she embraced it. Every adjustment to the algorithms, every pattern she uncovered, brought them one step closer to understanding the full extent of the enemy's plans. The USS Phantom was now the tip of the spear in a fight that would determine the future of underwater warfare, and Elise was ready to lead the charge. Elise sat at her workstation, staring at the sonar data that streamed in on the large display screen in front of her. For days, she had been tracking the movements of the UUVs, but something about the patterns she was seeing now was different. The drones were moving in a highly coordinated manner, converging on specific points along the Pacific's undersea infrastructure. She zoomed in on the coordinates, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard as she cross-referenced the data with known strategic military locations. It was then that the full scope of the operation hit her. As she pieced together the data, her stomach twisted with realization. These weren't just rogue drones operating in isolation. They were part of a much larger plan, one that involved Chinese deep-sea surveillance, The UUVs were systematically mapping key military sites, including sensitive undersea communication cables, and Elise knew that these were the lifelines of national security. The cables were the critical connections between the United States and its allies, and they were being targeted, silently, by an adversary who knew exactly what they were doing. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as the implications of her discovery began to sink in. This wasn't just a routine surveillance operation. This was a carefully orchestrated effort to weaken the United States defense infrastructure, one that could have devastating consequences. Elise felt a chill run through her. The USS Phantom was no longer just a vessel tracking these drones. It was now part of a counter-surveillance mission, trying to uncover a clandestine operation that could alter the balance of power in the Pacific. She had been brought here for this reason, but now the weight of the mission felt more intense than ever. The lives of countless people were at stake, and Elise's work had never been more important. She quickly compiled her findings, sending them to Captain Harlow with a message marked urgent. Her mind raced as she continued to analyze the data, drawing connections between the various UUVs and their strategic targets. The drones were not just passing by, they were systematically mapping out weaknesses, preparing for a future action. Elise's pulse quickened as she tracked one drone's movement toward a major undersea communications hub. It was a critical target, and she knew that if the drone successfully tapped into the system, the consequences could be catastrophic. The UUVs were laying the groundwork for a potential strike, and Elise had to act fast. The data continued to flood in, confirming her worst fears. This was no longer about simple reconnaissance. The Chinese deep-sea surveillance operation was clearly aimed at crippling the United States' ability to communicate and respond to threats in the Pacific. Elise's algorithms were now the key to stopping it. She fine-tuned her detection systems, adjusting the parameters to account for the increasingly sophisticated UUVs. Every tweak, every line of code, brought her one step closer to uncovering the full scope of the operation. She couldn't afford to waste time. Hours passed, and Elise worked tirelessly, the urgency of the situation gnawing at her. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her chest. As the USS Phantom continued its pursuit of the drones, Elise's role became even more critical. She was the only one who could make sense of the data, the only one who could connect the dots between the scattered pieces of information they had gathered. The silence of the submarine's control room was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the equipment and the steady clicking of keys as Elise adjusted the algorithms. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that this operation was far larger than they had initially thought. These UUVs were part of a concerted effort to map the most vulnerable points of the Pacific's undersea defense network. Elise's task had changed from simple detection to active counter-surveillance. She was no longer just tracking the drones, she was trying to outsmart them, to stay one step ahead of the enemy's next move. At the same time, Elise couldn't shake the growing sense of danger. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that this was not just an intelligence-gathering operation. This was preparation for a larger offensive. The data she had been analyzing was no longer theoretical. It was actionable. Intelligence. The drones were not just shadowing communication lines, they were positioning themselves for something far more sinister. Elise knew that if they didn't act quickly, it would be too late. She looked up from her workstation, her mind spinning with the complexity of the situation. The mission had shifted from an investigation to a race against time. She had to help the crew of the USS Phantom not only track these UUVs but also understand the full scale of the threat they posed. She could already see the pieces of the puzzle coming together in her mind. But she knew that the next few hours would be critical. The world was watching, even if they didn't know it yet. This wasn't just about protecting the USS Phantom. It was about safeguarding national security in a way that no one had anticipated. Elise's fingers flew over the keyboard again as she refined her analysis. The data was overwhelming, but it was also the key to preventing a disaster. She couldn't afford to let doubt cloud her focus. The stakes had never been higher, and she wasn't going to let the enemy take the initiative. The UUVs were already in position, and Elise had to ensure that they didn't get any closer to their ultimate goal. The Phantom's mission was no longer about detecting hidden threats. It was about exposing an enemy's plan before it was too late. Time was running out, and Elise knew she had to act fast if they were going to stop it. The mission aboard the USS Phantom had changed Elise in ways she wasn't fully ready to admit. The data they had gathered, the unmarked submarines, the covert operations, it had all blurred the lines between the life she had known and the shadows where she now found herself. And now, standing in Captain Harlow's office, she was faced with a decision that would irrevocably alter her future. Captain Harlow's offer was unexpected, yet not entirely surprising given the gravity of her contributions. He looked at her with steady eyes, his posture calm and measured. The submarine, the crew, the mission. It was all becoming clear now. The USS Phantom wasn't just a ship, it was a highly classified project, designed to address threats in ways the public would never know. Elise's role in that mission had become central, and Harlow wanted her to stay, to take on an even larger responsibility. He was offering her a permanent position as the executive officer of the submarine. It was a prestigious role, a clear advancement in her career. But the price was steep. As Harlow spoke, Elise's mind drifted to everything she had left behind her life on the USS. Nimitz. The friendships she had built over years of service. The quiet mornings with the sound of the ocean beneath her feet. This new position would mean leaving all of that behind. It wasn't just a physical departure, it was an emotional one too. The people she had worked with, the life she had come to know, all of it would fade into the background of her new, isolated reality. The weight of Harlow's words settled on Elise's shoulders, heavier than the unspoken history of this ship. She had been thrust into a world of secrecy, and now she had the chance to become one of its key players. But the cost was clear. Accepting this offer meant complete separation from her former life. No more messages to family or friends, no more vacations, no more visits home. Her entire existence would be dedicated to the USS Phantom and the mission they were carrying out. There would be no going back to the life she knew. The world above the surface would remain a distant, unattainable memory. Elise could feel the familiar pull of duty in her chest, the same feeling she had always known when she'd signed up for the Navy. The sense that she was part of something larger, something important. The work she was doing here was critical. No question about it. She had already seen the stakes. But what did it mean for her future? For the people who had always been there? For her? Would they understand? Would she even have time to explain? As Elise sat silently, the hum of the submarine around her felt distant, a constant reminder of the weight of her decision. The mission was more important than ever, and her skills had proven invaluable. She had found a place here, but this place came with its own kind of isolation, one that was deeper and more permanent than anything she had ever experienced. Her connection to the surface world, the world she had known before, was quickly slipping away, and with it, a sense of personal identity. In this new role, she would have to leave behind everything she once took for granted. But then there was the mission. The USS Phantom was operating in the shadows, uncovering secrets that no one else could. The crew here was unlike any she had ever worked with. They were all in the same boat, driven by the same sense of purpose. Together, they were preventing a catastrophic threat that no one else would ever know about. Elise's sense of responsibility, her sense of duty, told her that this was what she was meant to do. This was why she had joined the Navy in the first place. Still, the thought of never seeing her family again, never returning to the places she once called home, filled her with doubt. Was it worth it? Would the work she was doing, the importance of it all, truly be enough to justify the sacrifice the choice was hers to make? And the decision wasn't easy. Harlow was waiting for an answer, but Elise knew it wasn't a simple one. There were so many layers to this, so many lives intertwined with the future she was about to shape. A life of complete dedication to the mission, one that would strip away everything she knew, or a return to a more traditional life, with all its imperfections and familiarity as the seconds ticked by. Elise could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. The pressure was almost suffocating. There was no easy way out. The mission was urgent. The stakes were high. But what about her life? Could she reconcile the person she was with, the person she would become? Harlow's voice cut through her thoughts, bringing her back to the present. Think about it, Commander. This isn't just a role, it's a responsibility. The kind of responsibility that could define the future of national security. Your work has already made an impact, and I believe you can do even more here. But if you stay, it's a lifetime commitment. You'll disappear from the world you know and become part of something that will never be acknowledged. It's your choice. Elise nodded slowly, her mind racing. This wasn't just a career move. It was a life-altering choice. There was no going back once she made it. As she sat in the silence, the weight of her decision hung heavy in the air. No matter what path she chose, the world would be different. She would be different. Finally, Elise took a deep breath and looked up at Harlow. The decision was made, though the full ramifications had yet to hit her. She had chosen the path of duty, the path that would allow her to make a real difference, to be part of something that mattered on a level most would never understand. And as she spoke, her voice steady, her heart resolute, she knew she had made the right choice for her. The future would be uncertain, but it was hers to shape. "I'll stay," she said quietly, her decision final. Elise stood at the edge of the USS Phantom, the submarine now descending into the depths of the ocean. The hum of the engines resonated through the hull, a constant reminder that they were moving deeper into the unknown. As the submarine sank further below the surface, Elise felt the weight of her decision settle around her like the pressure of the ocean itself. She had chosen this path, embraced the uncertainty and isolation that came with it. The world above, the life she had once known, seemed a distant memory now. As the vast expanse of water swallowed it whole, the deeper they went, the more Elise understood the true cost of secrecy. This mission, this life, was one that would never be acknowledged by the public. The work she was doing aboard the USS Phantom would remain hidden, its victories invisible to the world. Elise thought about her family, her friends, the life she had left behind. She knew that her decision meant sacrificing those connections, cutting herself off from everything she once held dear. But as the pressure mounted and the depths pressed in, she also realized that some victories had to remain in the shadows. The weight of this truth was heavy, but it was the reality of the work she had chosen. As the USS Phantom descended further, Elise allowed herself a moment to reflect on the sacrifices she had made and the sacrifices the crew would continue to make. The crew members aboard the submarine had all chosen this life, understanding that the price of secrecy was high. They would never receive the recognition they deserved. Their contributions would remain classified, their names never spoken of in the history books. Elise felt a sense of camaraderie with them, a bond forged in silence, understanding that they were all part of something much larger than themselves. This was their burden to carry, and it was a weight they bore with quiet dignity. Looking out over the endless sea, Elise couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. The world above the surface was far behind now, slipping away with each passing minute. The USS Phantom was more than just a submarine. It was a symbol of the unseen, wars being fought beneath the waves, where victories were measured not in medals or accolades, but in silence and sacrifice. Elise understood now that her journey was not just about tracking UUVs or uncovering secret threats. It was about protecting a world that would never know the cost of their safety. And in that silence, she had found a new purpose, one that transcended everything she had known before. As the submarine settled into its operational depth, Elise knew that this mission would be unlike anything she had ever experienced. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the risks were greater too. But despite the uncertainty, despite the isolation, Elise felt a quiet sense of resolve. This was the life she had chosen, and she was ready to embrace it. The mission had only just begun, and the challenges ahead would test her in ways she could not yet comprehend. But she was no longer afraid. She had found her place in this world of secrecy, and she knew that her work aboard the USS Phantom would matter, even if the world would never know it. The submarine's lights flickered as they sank deeper, but the darkness outside was absolute. Elise felt the weight of the ocean above her, pressing down. But for the first time, she didn't feel the burden of her decision. She felt a strange peace, knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be. The USS Phantom was now her world, and in its depths, she would continue her mission fighting unseen battles in service to a country that would never fully understand the sacrifices made to protect it.